Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today what we're going to go through is we're going to talk about how to work out whether your pelvis is anteriorly tilted or forward tilted, why that's a problem or why that could be a problem, and then how to go about rectifying that. Now with anterior pelvic tilting, what a lot of people know is the pelvis is similar to a bowl, where that bowl in a perfect world would be orientated relatively sort of horizontally or in a good position. Now, if we tend to sort of dump that bowl forwards, a similar thing happens with our pelvis where as the bowl dumps forward, it compresses the tissue in the spine, puts the pelvis in a bad position, sort of deorientates a lot of the structures in the area, and can be a genuine contributing factor to not only back pain, hip pain, knee pain potentially, but also poor function. So what we know is that with a pelvis that tilts forward, so just for a visual, for a pelvis that tilts forwards, where that bowl is tilting forwards, we get a lot of compression up here in the spine, but it also puts all the tissues at the front of the hip, inside the hip and pelvic bowl and the glutes into a position where they can't function at their best. So what we often see is that if you are naturally anteriorly tilted through your pelvis, you can't actually get full hip rotation. Your pelvic floor may not necessarily work as well, which can lead to things like incontinence, erectile dysfunction, things like that, where we've sort of deorientated the base position of the pelvis, so the structures that rely on that potentially don't function at their best. And coming back to the hip rotation, if you're someone who plays a sport or does an activity like golf or even something like running, if you're in a less than ideal pelvic position, you can't get full access to the power and the strength and the full function of your hips if that pelvis is in a bad position. And coming up the chain, if that pelvis is dumping forwards all the time, it can really put a lot of strain on the lower back. So we can see people who are in that position chronically over time can start to get a little bit arthritic at the base of their spine. It can potentially be a contributing factor to the stenosis and the nerve root impingements that we see a lot of people get with low back pain, because we're always sort of closing down the joints at the back of the spine, and they're, over time they wear and they become a problem. So being able to notice or rectify that pelvic position can be a central fix, or it can be something that sets a lot of other dysfunctions up to resolve. But we obviously need to know how to figure that out to see whether you're in that position, and then also what to do to rectify that. So a very simple way to figure this out, and please try this at home, is when you're standing next with your feet straight, all I want you to do is squeeze your glutes, tense the muscles in your bum. And what should happen is, if your pelvis is in a good position to start with, nothing should really change with the orientation of your pelvis. But if you're naturally sort of dumping forwards and that bowl's tilting forwards, when you squeeze your glutes, you should feel like the pelvic bowl or the pelvis tilts back. It's a very, very simple test. The glutes sort of reorientate the pelvis and sort of pull it back down to a good position. So if you feel like you're experiencing some movement back when you do that, there's every chance that you're dumping forwards in this position, creating a whole range of unnecessary dysfunction through the sort of the center of your trunk and above and below, depending on the ramifications. So quick test, squeeze your glutes, see what happens. Now the next challenge with this is trying to figure out, how do we go from someone who chronically dumps forward to someone whose pelvis is more neutral again and can allow everything to function more normally? So what we know is, and this is generally the reason, or one of the reasons why the pelvis ends up dumping forwards in the first place, is if the hip flexors and the muscles at the front of the hip are tight. And the tightness at these hips basically pulls the front or the top of the pelvis down towards the top of the thigh, and it creates that dumping forward position. So traditionally we see this happen, and we see people who chronically sort of anteriorly pelvic tilt, we see it a lot in people who sit a lot, because in this position these muscles get tight, and then when you come up again you don't have the range to get out of that position, so it's much easier for your body to dump forward, to take the pressure off this area, but then again it loads other areas up. So the first point, in terms of the first part of trying to rectify that pelvic tilt, is to try and take off the handbrake that's keeping it there. So we've seen this before. We're going to go through the couch stretch. We won't go through a full sort of set of it. I'll link to a video that we've done previously, which is more in depth. But for those who don't know, the couch stretch is basically getting your leg into the corner of a chair. So obviously we don't have one here, we're just going to use the floor. We want to have the knee back in the corner, the shin up against the back, and then we're bringing your other leg up, and then depending on how flexible you are, keeping your back straight. Again, we don't want to dump into that forward pelvic tilt. We keep everything as it is and just come up as far as you can until you feel like you start to tighten at the front of the hip. Again, this is a much more brutal version. If your back knee is up on something, it's a lot easier. It can still be challenging, but if you can only get to this position before you feel like you reach the end of your tightness, that's fine. But we need to get you to the point where you feel like you can come up nice and tall and you can access this tightness and it's not a big deal. Because we're trying to open up the front of that hip, allow that pelvis to stay in a good position and relatively tilted back compared to the dumping forward that you may have had before. So that's step one. So taking the handbrake off the front of that thigh to allow that pelvis and that hip to be in a better position. The second thing we want to do is, and it's a very simple one, is when you are standing day to day, just practice squeezing your bum. So keeping that pelvis in a good position. But on top of that, what we know the pelvis and the hips like is when your feet are straight, try and screw those knees into your feet or into the ground, so to speak. So with your feet pointing straight, if I bend my knees a little bit, we want you to screw those knees outwards, but with your legs straight. And what you'll feel is as you do that, you'll feel some activation of the muscles in your glutes as they put your pelvis in a good position. So when you're standing around, if you're not doing much, try and squeeze your bum, rotate those legs out, just hang out in this position, get those muscles used to holding you in a good shape. And that can be part of the way to keeping this in a good position. The second part is, we want to make sure that we have your core muscles, the deeper muscles in your trunk, we want them braced so that when you're in this position and you can't hold your glutes, for example, you can't keep your glutes active and try and walk, otherwise you'll be very stiff-legged. But to put yourself in a good position, we then want to engage your tummy muscles, your deep abdominal trunk stabilizers, the muscles that brace your spine. We want those muscles to engage to hold that pelvis in a good position so that when your glutes release so you can move, that pelvis doesn't dump forward again. So part of that practice is feeling comfortable that if you find your hip bones at the front, if you just come in from that and dig in, there's a fleshy part where you can feel these muscles work. And if you take a deep breath in, and then as you breathe out, we want you to draw your deep muscles or your belly button almost in and up towards your spine. And with your fingers at the front of your hips, you should feel a layer of tissue deeper than your abs. You should feel that harden or tense or activate. And we want to make sure that you can capture that and gently have that activating when you're doing things, when you're walking around, when you're standing, to retrain and remodel your brain and your nervous system so it remembers to hold that pelvis in a good position. And what we can do on top of that to make this a little bit more beneficial is we want to incorporate that good position with your glutes tensed, your core muscles holding your pelvis in a good position. We then want to put it into functional movements like something like a squat or a deadlift or a good morning, which is basically a hip hinge. If we can challenge you to maintain that good pelvic position whilst you're squatting, deadlifting or hip hinging, then it retrains the muscles and the nervous system to do that naturally. So how that looks is, to begin with, when we're in a good position, feet straight, screw those knees out, activate your trunk muscles to hold that into a good position. And then what we want to do basically is, for something like a squat, we want to maintain that as we squat down without letting, so we do this from the side, without letting your pelvis sort of tilt or dump as you come down. So we want to make sure that the position that you start in is the position that you end up in without sort of losing that position. Same thing with a deadlift or a good morning. We want to make sure that we can create a good pelvic position so it's not tilted, it's a neutral shape, and then keeping that position the same as you do something like a good morning, which is basically just a hip hinge, or if you're into weights and you're doing a deadlift as well, we want to make sure that that position doesn't change despite what you're doing. So those couple of ideas can be a really fast-acting way to get you from someone who dumps forward chronically to bringing you back into a more neutral position and giving you back that access to your function through your pelvis, through your back, and through your hips. So it's often a hidden cause of a lot of dysfunction, but it's often a root cause of a lot of dysfunction because it doesn't hurt to be in that position for a lot of people, but being in that position has consequences for a whole bunch of other tissue around that that's not used to sort of losing slack or being weak or inhibited. Like I said, there's so many things that that anterior pelvic tilt can sort of create. So being able to recognize how you are and then being able to put it back into a better position and retrain that is a really powerful way to improve the foundation of your trunk, whether it be for pain purposes, injury purposes, or just improved function, whether that be, like I said, some pelvic floor stuff, incontinence stuff, or whether you just want to be a better athlete. It's a really important idea to master. And then as we do with all these videos, if you're mastering those ideas, in essence, all of that is basically a symptomatic treatment. We're trying to get you into a better position, but we also need to make sure that you're resolving the reason why you ended up in that position in the first place. For most people, it tends to be sitting based, with a lot of sitting in that flex position. This hip flex is getting tight. So if you're taking the time to free up the front of your hips, we need to make sure that you're investing in changing either the amount of time that you sit or the frequency that you are sitting. So obviously standing is ideal, but we want to make sure that you're changing positions. And there are times when you do have to sit for obvious reasons, whether you have to drive or commute or for a lot of work related things. But when you don't have to sit, maybe try and get out of that position. Or worst case scenario, if you can't improve on any of the sitting you do throughout the day, which is rare, but if it's you need to make sure that you're spending a lot more time at the end of the day trying to undo some of that accumulated tightness through the front of your hip to try and balance that out. Otherwise, it's hard to make that sort of reorientate and stay that way without your body just defaulting back to the position it defaulted to in the first place. So hopefully there's some ideas to run with. As always, please like the video and also subscribe if you enjoy the content. It really supports us, but it also helps these videos reach more people. As we said before, a lot of these videos are inspired by conversations that we have with patients in real time. So they're things that we need to address with people to help them get to where they want to be, whether it be pain or function wise. And in my experience, those conversations are great because they speak to things that a lot of other people are thinking or dealing with. So we want to make sure that this content is as relevant and as helpful as possible. So by sort of engaging with this, sharing it around, subscribing and liking, it really helps that happen. So as always, these videos are coming out pretty much daily. Hopefully we don't sort of miss that schedule too much, but let us know if you have any questions. But until the next one, we'll see you then. Bye.